Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Gray Matter. Today is kind of an auspicious one because for the first time, we have a guest on the program whom we learned about from one of our viewers. And so that's a great sign. First of all, that people are watching and paying attention, and also that they care enough about the content to put us on to some people who have interesting and meaningful things to say. Our guest today is a very accomplished man. He's a man who's had a very successful career as an engineer, as an inventor, as a teacher. But most recently, he has been someone who's been out front as an advocate on behalf of our fellow Canadians, involved in something called Citizens for Truth. His name is Kenneth Drysdale. I have to be careful not to call him Mr. Drysdale, and he'll know why, because that is going to remind us both of a certain television show that two of us are old enough to remember. And I don't think anybody would want to be compared with Mr. Drysdale. Anyway, we're very grateful to have him here. A little bit about Ken. He is, as I said, he's an executive engineer with over 40 years of experience as a professional engineer and 29 years of experience in the development and management of national and regional engineering businesses. I have to tell you, I have a description of him that if I went through it would take up the entire thrust of the program here. So I'm going to hit some of the highlights. First of all, he has degrees in science and civil engineering, a master's certificate, troubleshooting concrete, certificate for advanced project management. Suffice it to say, he really knows how to build stuff and how to put things together. He's received a number of awards, including the Canadian Consulting Engineers Award, Design Excellence, twice. He's a fellow of the Engineers of Canada, Sustained Development Award, Manitoba Roundtable on Sustainable Development. And he's also, in addition to all of his business experience, management experience, engineering experience, he's also an inventor. He's an inventor of two proprietary engineering systems, including Accutech Zero Energy Ice System. I can only imagine what that is. Accutech Permafrost Drainage System. I'm going to suspect that these are very useful systems that are fully patented.
We can have a talk about that.
At least I hope so. And he's also, throughout his life, he has been a contributor to numerous industry groups, including the National Building Code of Canada, Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists, and the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies of Canada. Throughout his life, he's been involved in the community through associations with organizations such as the Children's Rehabilitation Foundation, Scouts Canada, and Prairie Dog Central Railway, to name a few. So, welcome to Gray Matter, Mr. Kenneth Drysdale.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I'd put that modifier in there. So Ken, I just found out about you and about some of the things you're doing with Citizens for Truth. And we're going to get into that. And I'm very interested to find out more about Citizens for Truth and the work that you've been doing. But before we do that, as we always do, we're going to frame our today's discussion in the context of a couple of quotations that I've chosen particularly for you in this broadcast. I've entitled this particular episode Truth Seeker. I hope you'll take that as a compliment. The first quotation is from a famous American novelist named William Faulkner. And he once wrote, "Never be afraid to raise your voice for honesty and truth and compassion against injustice and lying and greed. If people all over the world would do this, it would change the earth." Secondly, the second one is from a very famous French philosopher, Enlightenment philosopher named Voltaire. And he once famously wrote, "So long as the people do not care to exercise their freedom, those who wish to tyrannize will do so, for tyrants are active and ardent, and will devote themselves in the name of any number of gods, religious and otherwise, to put shackles upon sleeping men." So, Ken, I wonder, before we get into some of these topics more in depth, if we could find out a little bit more about you. Would you mind? I mean, we've got your CV and all of your many souvenirs, but I'd be interested to know a little bit more about you, your background, where you're from, your family, growing up, why you got into engineering, and how you became an innovator and an inventor and things of that nature, just to kind of get a sense of who you are, where you're from, and what makes you tick.
Well, those are interesting questions. People are usually afraid to ask me them because I'll go on all night long. Uh, I was born on a mink ranch, and a lot of your readers probably don't know what that is anymore. We had 5,000 little furry minks running around, and on that farm, I used to build stuff all the time at the disdain of my father. Be building little buildings or houses or forts, like a lot of people on the farm used to do, little cars, and be inventing things. And the way I got into engineering was I was very good friends in my senior year in high school with the counselor, wonderful man, by the way, Mr. Ingram Oja, who's no longer with us. Anyway, we were having a discussion, and he said to me, Ken, you're doing pretty good in high school. What are you going to do when you get out of high school? I said, well, I'm going to become a physicist. And he said to me, where are you going to get a job being a physicist? And I said, I don't know. And he said to me, be an engineer. I said, what's that? And he said, don't worry about it. You'll make good money. There'll always be work for you. And I trusted him, so I became an engineer.
Incredible. So where was the mink ranch, Ken? Was this in Manitoba or?
Yeah, it was in a small village about 20 minutes north of Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
It was an interesting life. We were right on the edge of a little village, and we had I think about 42 acres, and I had 9 brothers and sisters, and mom and dad, in a 700 square foot 2-bedroom house with no running water. So that's why I was out in the forest building little forts and go-karts and stuff, because you didn't want to hang around. That house was pretty crowded, So, so I went to engineering school and graduated, and my first job was in a small consulting structural engineering consulting firm. From there, I went on to one of the very well known at the time national Canadian firms called UMA Engineering. They were bought out some time ago by an American group, but I was the youngest national director of industrial commercial services there.
Really? Wow.
Yep. And then in 98, I started my own firm, and we specialized in building buildings in the very high Arctic. And I think I've worked in every town in Nunavut. I built every kind of building you can imagine up there, and that's where those inventions that you talked about came from.
Yeah.
And then when I retired in 2016, it's kind of funny. People kind of giggle about this, but as a kid, I was somebody that was always out building stuff, inventing stuff, and then I became an engineer, and I kind of drew things and told other people how to do it. I retired on a Friday. And on the Monday, I went back to college and became a certified welder because I always wanted to weld things. So now I have a little welding business that I just kind of fool around with. And then on top of that, my wife, she's a performing artist. She's got a television show called Time to Sing, nationally syndicated show. And when we built a new house, and we have a commercial audio video studio in it. And so now I am president, CEO, and audio engineer at Studio Bella Rosa. So in addition to all that, we have 6 children, and we have 4 grandchildren now. We've got our fingers crossed, but we're not sure that we're going to get any more. And they're here today, actually running around. So if they come scooting into the door, I've given you some advance warning about that.
Wonderful. I have a great admiration, and especially and frankly an envy of people who can build things and make things. My father-in-law is from a community that sounds a lot like the one you're from, and he's one of these guys. I call him MacGyver because he could make things out of. He just anytime he needs something, he just makes it. And I asked him one time, how do you do this? How do you? And he says, well, like you. Where we were so isolated. There was no Canadian Tire. There's no Walmart. You gotta, for example, he can do anything with a block and tackle mechanism. and I didn't understand what a block and tackle was before I saw him make one. And he says, we had to make do. We had to create stuff in order to get things done. I'm curious though about your work in the Arctic and the innovations that you did there. Can you describe maybe some of the? And I realize we can't get into the really dense engineering stuff, but in a general way, what are the special challenges that you face as an engineer in constructing buildings and things of that nature in the high Arctic?
Well, the first thing that you have to remember is that in Nunavut, there's no road access, and it's too expensive to fly. You do occasionally fly small things in, but the cost of that is incredible. So you have to design your building, and you have to have it ready for tender in May of every year, because it gets on. What they do is they have to manufacture the parts. They have to get them on a barge, and then it's got to go up north around from the port of Montreal around into Hudson Bay and then into the area there. So you've got to be really disciplined about timing. A cost of a building there is typically, a general terms, a kind of a run-of-the-mill school down here in the south would run you about $300 a square foot. Up there, it's about $1,100 to $1,200 a square foot.
Oh my goodness.
Transportation costs are incredible, but of course, the working season is very short. You can only work for the snow is melting up there right now. So we would be kind of starting to work about now, and then you work your off until it starts to get cold in October, end of October. And if you can achieve closure of the building, get the skin of the building up, you'd keep working. But generally speaking, over the first year, you don't. So transportation, isolation, shortness of the year, manpower, you have to bring in a lot of the manpower. I mean, you can still you always employ folks in the communities, but it's very limited because the communities there are extremely small. The second largest community there is Rankin Inlet. It's only, 3,000 people, 2,500 people there. So the communities are very small, so you don't have much local personnel you can draw upon. So you're bringing all that in as well. You're putting them up, you're feeding them. And then you have the challenges of dealing with permafrost, with extreme weather conditions, really heavy snow, wind, those kinds of things. So it's a completely different outlook. And when I talk about the cost being so high, about 25% of those additional costs are due to the complexities of permafrost and weather. The rest of them are because of transportation and labor costs and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting place to work. Really loved it. The people were really good. I mean, they're incredible. It's the Nunavut people or the Inuit people are very different than what you would probably expect. I mean, an Inuit person my age remembers themselves how they were living in a traditional sense because they were that short a time ago. And so where you look at where they are now and where they were then, the Inuit people have a foot in both worlds, really, and it's a foot. The foot in the traditional world is one that they actually remember. It's not 10 generations ago. It's people my age, grandpa. That's the way we lived. So right. It's a really interesting society. It's very good people, and it's beautiful. It's people ask me, how can that be beautiful? And I've always explained it that if you're here and you're in, I don't know if you're in Montreal or you're in the Shield country in Ontario, it's like you're listening to an orchestra. There's trees, there's birds. When you're in Nunavut, it's like you're listening to an oboe player. Uh-huh. And so, yes, it's barren, but it has its own beauty and the simplicity of what it is.
Mm-hmm. It's a sublime beauty, right?
It is, absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you describe that. We had another guest earlier on this podcast, Dr. Rodney Clifton, who's a university professor, and he spent a couple of years in the north living among the Inuit people there, and he had very similar impressions, especially of the people there and of being up there, and had really memories of living there that sustained him almost for a lifetime. It was almost like a Darwinian experience, as you probably know, Charles Darwin
Mhm.
traveled around for a couple of years when he was a teenager on a merchant ship, and then he spent the rest of his life describing what he saw. And this is kind of what Rod Clifton did. Um, I'm curious though, before we move off of this whole engineering part of your life, you sort of understated the significance of these inventions. How did this come about where you developed these two major inventions that we mentioned off the top in your bio? How did those come about?
One was an opportunity, and the other one was a necessity. The one about the zero ice in in Nunavut, of course, electricity is incredibly expensive. Oil is incredibly expensive, and believe it or not, in in some of the larger communities, and remember those are 3,500 people, they want and they should have because they're so isolated. They want top-notch facilities, and so when they were building ice rinks up there, they were putting artificial ice in them.
You're
And
kidding.
I'm not kidding.
Wow.
And they were putting some really strange forms of artificial ice in there. And they weren't working. They were costing an incredible amount of money to run. I mean, I don't know what electricity is where you are, but here it's 6 or 7 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour. There it's like $3.50. So
Wow.
it was unsustainable. They couldn't operate the darn things. They'd spend $50 million on an ice rink, and in a year it would be broken down and nobody'd know how to service it, and people wouldn't come up, and they'd lose the refrigerant in it, and it'd be sitting there just a mess. And so we for some time in the Arctic, we've used I won't get into the details of it, but it's what they call a passive refrigeration system. And someday over a beer, I can explain it to you, but leave it to say that they use this kind of a system to refrigerate foundations so that they don't thaw. And it occurred to us that we could use that same system to produce artificial ice, and I'll get to why you need artificial ice. And we also had to install some internal dehumidification systems in the rinks, and then we extended the ice time from. They used to start trying to put the ice in October, and even though it was like frozen, 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 they could never achieve it for a bunch of reasons. And so they get ice in about December, and then in March, in their traditional ice rinks, they'd have about 2 inches of ice built up on the underside of the inside of the building. And in March, when the sun first came up, it hit it and it go plump onto the ice.
Oh,
Ice is over.
yeah.
So by putting in these systems, first off, they cut their energy bills for artificial ice to zero from millions. And then we put in a ventilation system as well, and we managed that they could get their ice in September, and they could hold it all the way to almost July. No electricity involved. Matter of
Wow.
fact, Matter of fact, I don't believe this myself, but in one community, I can't quite remember which one it was. They were saying that the ice was so cold in the wintertime that their skate blades were snapping. Now, I don't quite believe that, but they told me that. So that was one of them. And another one was we did spend a fair amount of time in the Arctic fixing other people's mistakes, and going back a few years, people would go up there really not knowing what they were doing, but the work might be drying up in the south, and so they designed a bunch of schools in Guelph, Ontario, or something, and they figured they could go up there and do it there, and you just couldn't. So we would spend a lot of time fixing things, and there was a particular school in Rankin Inlet, which was it had a problem where the foundations were moving all over the place because it wasn't designed for permafrost, and there was an underground flow of moisture coming from a high rocky plateau across the site and was flooding the crawl space. So what the heck do you do with that? So we invented this system where it's like a French drain system you would have here, but as in the downward part of where if this was a drain and the water was coming in this direction, we put those same technology we used in the artificial ice plant and put it into the ground behind the French drain to keep it frozen all year round. And then we insulated the up portion of the thing so that the water would come down, that gravel would be thawed out, it would hit where the French drain was. Any further it couldn't go because the ground was solidly frozen like forever, and then we would divert it around the building. So we solved that problem at really a fairly low cost, where we really needed, if we didn't come up with that, we would have needed to lift the whole school, tear out the foundations, and redo it again, which would have been I don't even know how much, millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Fascinating.
And I didn't patent it, and I'll tell you why.
No? Okay.
No, I'll tell you why. Patenting isn't like a criminal law. So let's say ABC company that's worth $1 billion in the United States steals it. It's up to me to sue them in civil court, and I'll never be able to do it. So our strategy was we got it out there and we did every community. So it was, who else could do it? It was already done.
Right.
One funny story about it though, I got a phone call a couple of years into this from a very senior person in the government, and they were mad and they were yelling at me about this one job, and I listened, and they were mad and they were swearing at me, and I said, wait a minute. I said, what job did you say this was? And they told me. I said, we didn't do that job. So interesting enough, we got it. We looked at it for them, and somebody, and I won't name them who, but it's anyway. We'll all know who they are. Friends of our prime minister, and they had copied our design, but they had copied it upside down. I'm not making this up. And of course, it didn't work. And we pointed it out to the guy that was screaming at me that day, and he goes, "Never mind." So I don't know what they did with it.
The second name sounds like Gravelin.
Yeah.
That story, Ken, you told me reminds me of a novel, a great novel I read many years ago. It's made it actually into a movie starring Harrison Ford in the 80s. It was called The Mosquito Coast. It's about this mad scientist, and he invents a way to you'll appreciate this. He invents a way to make ice through a mixture of gases, and he gets the idea that he's going to move his whole family into the Amazon jungle because, of course, they would be like the Inuit. They will have never seen ice, right? And of course, the whole thing goes horribly, horribly wrong. But for those of you who haven't read that one, it's called The Mosquito Coast. It's a really terrific book and a really good movie as well. So Ken, just to segue a little bit, I see from your bio, you also got very involved in public speaking. How did that come about? Was that through your work with the Scouts, or?
No, when I was with UMA Engineering, and I was a director of their commercial industrial services across Canada. At that time, we were also doing or attempting to do a lot of international work, and so I got involved at that time. I was I used to speak to all kinds of various people, companies, politicians, and whatnot right around the world. I spent 6 weeks in, I guess you're not supposed to say this anymore, Russia. And I met with pretty much every minister there was there over a 6-week period. I was in Kazakhstan, Egypt. And part of what I did to assist myself in that is I was in Scouts as a Scoutmaster for 10 years, but I was also became a member of the Rotary Club because it also gave me some opportunities. And so that's where that all came from. I mean, usually engineers are hiding, somewhere in front of behind a computer, and you never really see them. Contractors throw stuff at them.
Okay, so let's get into the guts of this now. What is Citizens for Truth, first of all, and in terms of what is its focus and mission? That's kind of the first question. And the second one is, how did you get involved with Citizens for Truth? Are you a founder, or were you conscripted by them, or how did this happen?
Well, it's a little bit of all of those things. Citizens for Truth sounds a little ostentatious, but really what it was is there were a few of us, probably a dozen or so of us, who were members of a certain national club system, where there's one in your city. And we supported them all through the original shutdowns for a year. And then when the government said to them, if you practice apartheid, you can open up and let half of your members in. And when they did that, I'd been a 20-year member. I'd been a big contributor to them. I've been on many committees on construction. And I said to them, think real hard about this, because if you do this, it may have dire consequences for you. And they went ahead and did it. And so we quit. I quit the next day. And a week or so later, we were having drinks at my house with another one of the members. And at first, we just started talking about it'd be nice to be able to get together with people with the same kind of ideas. So we contacted about half a dozen people, started having dinner at my house, and we live way outside of the city, so there was no one to see what we were doing. and it grew to about 35 people. And that was really fun. You're having dinner, and sometimes we catered them, sometimes we did potluck, and we had two. We had one at Halloween, we had one at Christmas, and then 4 or 5 of us. It was really fun, but we started to feel kind of itchy that we should really be doing something more than this.
Right.
And one particular lady on the group really felt deeply about that. So we got together as a working group, the 5 of us, 4 or 5 of us, and we started talking about, what could we do to contribute to this? And the initial thought was, well, we'll get some kind of a report together, and we'll point out all of the things the matter with the vaccine, and we'll talk about all the doctors, like Dr. Zelenko, who's, and what they say about this. And with my background, having done probably hundreds of expert reports, forensic engineering reports for trial basis, and having been in court many, many, many times as an expert, I said, that's not going to do it. We're in a place in our society where Supreme Court justices of the United States can't say what a woman is.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, there's no point in doing a report that relies on doctors' opinions and whatnot. And they said to me, well, what the heck else are we going to do? And I said, let's see what their own words tell us. They've been saying this, Statistics Canada is saying something. Let's actually do a deep dive in there and see what their own words are. And one of the reasons I said this, and it might be a little bit of a stretch, but a dear friend who's a senior lawyer in a big firm here in Winnipeg, and we were in court one time, and I said to him, why didn't you ask this question? And he said to me, I never ask a question that I already don't know what answer I'm going to get from the witness. and part of that's on discovery and a bunch of other things, but he's right. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about what he said is, I thought, how can the government of Canada refute us if we take their own words, don't adjust them, don't justify them, and actually see what they've been telling us all this time? And I had no idea what I was going to find. Mm-hmm. So given this path and given my experience, I think my wife volunteered me to do it, but it was logical I would do it. The other folks, they've got businesses and that, but they don't do this kind of thing. So off I went and started to write the report. And it was funny, and you get a laugh out of this, but a couple of the people when we were, okay, I'll do this thing, they said to me, well, will it be done by Friday? This was Wednesday. And I said, it's going to be done in about 6 weeks.
It sounds like my clients. Yeah.
I mean, I took 140, 180 hours to put together that report, because it's not just, the words are there. First, if you got to understand what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and then you have to find it. Then you have to figure out what the heck it's saying, and then you have to put it together in something that people can understand. Because particularly when you're writing something like this, and the intent wasn't that this was going to go out in the public. It has, big time. But the intent was, it was a document going to the police. And so we outlined in that document, in the very first sections, we outlined to the police, why were the police required to act on this? So we went into the Police Services Act, and we quoted what their duties are. And we quoted what the duties of a police officer was. And we quoted to them what their oaths were, although RCMP oath is pretty useless unless you're the Queen. And then we went through and we identified the basis, the timing of the criminal acts. And again, we're trying to be as neutral and put ourselves in a position that who could argue with us. And so what we said was, when this pandemic was first announced, you might expect that they wouldn't know what to do, and they'd be scrambling, trying to figure stuff out, and they wouldn't have data to know what the right thing was. So what we said was, the data that was required for me, Ken Drysdale, as a normal citizen, to know what was going on was available from Stats Canada in May of 2021. Now, they would have had that information long before that. But from our purpose, we said, whatever they did from May of 2021 was criminal, because they knew this, and they would have known it earlier. So, and again, what we were doing was we were putting together a document and telling the police, here's smoke. we're not doing your whole investigation for you, but we're giving you enough irrefutable evidence that you must act and you must do the detailed investigation. Now, in part of this, we also defined for them who we thought were culpable in this. And in addition to that, you'll laugh at this, we pulled out portions of the Criminal Code of Canada and we defined out of there, quoting the Criminal Code of Canada, who's responsible for a crime. Like, for instance, you don't have to be a robber to be part of that crime. If you're a banker and you were the last to leave the bank and you purposely left the door unlocked and turned the alarm off, and then the robber came in, you're part of that crime.
Section 20, Section 21. Yeah,
exactly. So we laid out those first sections again as an instruction to the police, because we've known, I've experienced myself in other things where the police don't do a darn thing. Try speeding down the highway at 5 kilometers an hour over because you need to get to the hospital on time, and then they'll act. But so that was the first part of the report. And some people question me why the report was written in the way it was. That was the reason why.
When did you start work on this, Ken, on the report?
In February, about close to the end of February, and we finished it about March 21st. Mm-hmm. And then we took about a week or two to start sending it out. And I think the cover letter to the police is dated April 11th or something.
Mm-hmm. So for people who aren't that familiar, or maybe aren't as familiar as you are, obviously, with what was going on in Manitoba, you guys might have been the most locked down province in all of Canada.
Except
so I mean, you must have been, but the impression is they didn't mind as much. But at least that's my impression.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
We laugh about that, but in Manitoba we kind of have a saying: if you get a blizzard here and people are locked up for 2 or 3 days, in 9 months you got a bump in the babies, right?
Yeah.
Well, people here were locked up for I don't know how many months, and the actual number of births in Canada went down by 11,000 between 2019 and 2020. Wow. Now, if you were locked up all this time, now I don't know what the reason for that was, but we did find that statistic and we put it in our report, and we said, why isn't it 11,000 babies less? And the population went up by 750,000, by the way, from 2019 to 2020. So why isn't someone questioning this?
Yeah,
it's incredible.
This must have been rather unpopular. I mean, you guys must have been under some scrutiny and some pressure, given what was going on in the province. I know, for example, our firm has appeared in Manitoba many times to fight COVID tickets, and we also represent a number of clients there in COVID-related matters. And there's a tenor in Manitoba where the police and the Crown prosecutors and the government really took this stuff seriously. It's coming right from Mr. Pallister, right? Yeah. So that must have been difficult to deal with. You were taking some risk there, weren't you?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because some people have said, and not few of them have said to me, well, how come there isn't a name on this report? Well, they're actually, the reason for that was there's 4 or 5 of us in this group. The other 4 are, they have young families, they're running small businesses, and they do business with the government. They were afraid of reprisals. Yeah. And I mean, I wrote the report, so I need to stand behind it and I need to take responsibility. I mean, I'm running some businesses and stuff, but you know what? They're more hobby fun things than anything else. So it was logical that I wrote the darn thing and I would stand up and take responsibility. So my answer to that is exactly what you were asking. These folks were terrified of what was going to happen. Is that ridiculous? We know people whose bank accounts were closed down. No judicial review, but the bank accounts were closed down. Mm-hmm. And when we saw what happened in Manitoba, and I don't know how many of your viewers might be aware of this, but there's a continuing presence of protesters in front of the Manitoba Legislature building. And one Friday night at about 8, 9, or 10 o'clock at night, some crazy guy in a Jeep vehicle came up to where the people were standing. He drove over 4 of them. So he went around traffic, drove them down, ran them down. The car went over top of these people, took off in a high-speed chase. was caught by the police, resisted arrest. Saturday morning, 9 a.m., he was out. How
Incredible.
long was Tamara Leach in
Oh,
jail for? What was it? Inciting or
mischief.
encouraging
Yeah,
mischief?
mischief.
So this, I don't want to say a bad word. This guy ran over 4 people. He wasn't even charged with attempted vehicular homicide. I think he was charged with assault or something, and he resisted arrest, a high-speed chase, and he's out the next day, less than 12 hours later. And Tamara's in jail for months. Pastor Arter's in jail for 53 days, 51 days, whatever
Yes.
it is.
Arrested 17 times. We just had him on this program.
I mean,
Yeah.
so can you blame these people who have young families and young businesses?
Mhm.
So, again, that's kind of some of the history of the pressure these folks are under. Now, they're all there. They're all behind me, and we're sending this thing out, and we've hooked up with other groups and are getting some good advice, and I think we're getting some traction. But we don't live in a strong and free country anymore. And I'm not talking about just the rumor stuff. There's lots of rumor stuff going on. And I haven't heard a whole lot talked about what happened in Ottawa during the protests. Were those foreign soldiers in that group where the RCMP was? I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of discussion. If they were or weren't, to me, it's irrelevant.
Mhm.
But they were beating people. We saw the beatings with nightsticks and knees and tear gas, peaceful protesters. So that's the, you're absolutely right. That's the environment in which this thing was put together.
Right. So you talked about sort of the genesis of the idea of for Citizens for Truth and the report. So the report would have been released about what time frame?
It was about I think we sent it out to all the police stations, Canada or Manitoba wide, and all of the MPs, member of Parliament, member of the Senate, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was about April 11th or so, something like that.
Okay. So what's the chicken and what's the egg here? Was Citizens for Truth the beginning, and then the report is sort of a product of that, or did Citizens for Truth sort of form in the aftermath, in the wake of the report, or were they somewhat simultaneous?
Again, I don't want to overemphasize the Citizens for Truth. We wrote a report, and we wanted to know what the heck we were going to do with it, and we had to put something at the bottom.
Oh, it's the name.
Yeah, and again, people were afraid to put their names on it.
Okay.
And we knew that was going to be an issue. Although it's funny, you know, we're negotiating right now with the local police and the RCMP, and one of the things they said was to us, well, you know, we got this thing, but it was anonymous, and it didn't really ask for criminal investigation. And if you read the thing in the letter and in the first 10 paragraphs, we want a criminal investigation. There's murder, there's malfeasance. And then the thing about it not being signed, that's really interesting, because I didn't know that Crime Stoppers identified all of their people to the police. So, you know, anyway, we're trying to negotiate a meeting and a presentation with them. And I can't talk too much about that because there's a lot of strategy going on right now. And I'm not trying to be coy. It's just,
No, I understand.
in a week or two, I'll know a lot more about that, and we have a number of other phases coming. But so the initial intent was to get it to the police, do a bang up job, and make sure it's accurate, it's understandable, and it's irrefutable, and the police will act. Well,
so that was the goal. The goal was to put faith in the Canadian justice system, to put faith in the truth, and see whether our institutions would still operate the way they're supposed to, or at least the way we've known them to. And the answer that came out was what?
We didn't see the report, and we said, well, here's the strip, because we send it to you by registered mail, and it was received here, and here's the thing. So, well, we can't find it. So what we did then was we started to talk to various other groups, and we started to talk to just people, you know, people we knew, and we started to do, I don't know, it may be in this thing, it may be in this type of work, it's not that unusual, but we started to produce things like these business cards, and then on the back there's a QR code, and we were giving these things out, and you know, I don't know, somehow it caught on, and it spread across the country. I have thousands and thousands of people asking me for the links, asking me for the report, asking me how they can help. And people have been sending it to, I don't know, the Minister of Transportation. He's got it 20, 30 times from 20, 30 different people or 100 people across the country. People have been sending it to all of their police stations. There's a group in Vancouver or BC that are converting it. Like there's perhaps two sections in the report that are Manitoba, that are focused on Manitoba. The first part is where we name names in who the criminal participants were. And then in the second part, we did some analysis of the ICU beds in Manitoba. And so it's fairly easy to convert this to other provinces. And my suggestion is we were extremely lucky, and it was very serendipitous that we found the information in ICU beds. The government hides that like you can't believe.
I can believe.
Yeah, we found University of Manitoba reports dating back to 2010 that talked about the numbers of beds in the mid 2000s, 2006, 2007, and then we found reports after H1N1 that entitled things like "Lessons Learned from H1N1 in Manitoba." They didn't learn any lessons. They put down a bunch of crap, and then they charged us taxpayers for it. And then in 2019, the NDP, who are in opposition provincially here, got FOIA requests from one of the largest health districts in Manitoba and got all of the numbers there and all of the labor numbers. So, and this was something we found throughout everything we looked at. Every time we scratched a subject, we not only found that there were lies, but there were lies and compounded lies and more lies, and then there was confusion. And ICU beds was a good example of that. But one of the great challenges we had with putting this report together was, where do you stop?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything we looked at was wrong or lies from the way the government reported information. They lied about it, and they put it in such a way that a person couldn't understand it. And a really good example of that was they were reporting two things. They were reporting the numbers, three things actually. Right at the very beginning, they were reporting about how there was such a jump in the overall death rate in Canada between 2019 and 2020. Well, what they didn't take into account was the population in Canada jumped 750,000 people over that time period. And we actually graphed the data. So we graphed the actual data, and then we normalized the data, which means, from 2006 to 2019, there were like 8 or 9 million more people in Canada. So you couldn't use the same statistics. So we normalized the data, which means we decided that we would proportionally increase the mortality and the population up to 38 million for all the years. And then we plotted it. And it was really interesting. From about 2014 or 2012, the line of deaths was increasing all the way until you hit 2019, and there was an absolute drop of 5,000 or 6,000 deaths. And also, if you looked at that line, it of course should have increased. If had COVID not happened in 2020, the line would have increased because of the population and because of aging and all that, and the trends and all that kind of stuff. So really, the increase in overall deaths in Canada in 2020 was about 6,000, and the magic drop in 2019 was about 5,600. And of course, keep in mind that data doesn't come out for about 6 months after the year. So is something funny going on there? I don't know, but it's sure a coincidence. And then there were other things. We all heard the government talking about recovery rates and how risky it was if you got COVID. Well, they played a trick on people there. And I'll give an example. I could tell you, and I would be telling you the truth, that if you go outside and you get hit by a bulldozer, you're going to die. You got a 100% chance of dying from a bulldozer if you get hit by it when you walk outside. That's true. The trouble is what's the chances of you getting hit by a bulldozer? Last year in Canada, 38 million people. I bet you there was none. Maybe there was one. But so what the government did is it reported the statistics in the same way. So we have 38 million people. They were testing a certain number of people. Let's say they tested I don't know what the number is. Let's say they tested 1 million people. So then they took the mortality and they divided it by the number of people they tested. Well, of course, that's nonsense. Because unless you tested the whole 38 million population, you couldn't possibly know how many people were infected in there. So
Right.
really, you should have taken the mortality rate. So if you had 10 people die and you divided it by 38 million, that would reflect the odds of you getting the disease in the first place, and then the odds of you dying if you got the disease. So those two numbers are very, very different. So they were reporting not only nonsense numbers, but they were fudging the numbers. And a regular Canadian who's trying to feed their family or going to work every day and they're going to church on Sunday, they haven't got time to figure all that stuff out.
Mhm.
And I can show you graphs and tables taken right off the government website. They show this. One other example is, you're supposed to be able to make an informed decision about whether you're going to take the genetic shot. And in the beginning, if you went to the Government of Canada COVID update site, and they had a chart on the bottom that was interactive, and you could ask it, how many people were hospitalized after taking the genetic treatment, and it would give you a number. And you could put in how many people died, and it would give you a number. Guess what? They took the died part out. People are still dying, but they've hidden it from you. So if you're trying to make an informed decision, informed consent, how can you do that if you didn't know people died?
Mhm.
So and again, that's just one section of the stuff that we looked at.
Mhm.
And as we were doing this, we had I didn't have an agenda. I didn't know where this was going to lead me. I just kept picking up rocks and looking underneath them.
But it's become kind of a grassroots movement, hasn't it?
Oh, it has.
Yeah, and it's gathering steam. We have I think we have a short video that is very stirring. Devin, can we show that now? Do you have the video? Wow, that's brilliant. I love that music. Did your wife produce that music? It sounds like the theme from the movie Gladiator. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And that movie just makes me want to get up and just march. Or that music. I love it. That's awesome.
I've got two older brothers, and we got together the other day, and we were talking about it. And my one brother said to me, and I, I puffed out my chest and I pretended, "What do you mean?" And he said to me, Ken, we're getting old, and I don't have as much testosterone as I used to. And when I watched your video, I cried, and secretly inside, I said to myself, "So did I." And Rosalie caught me.
See, I had the opposite. I had the fight response. You guys had the flight. I don't know. But
just before we leave that for a second,
sure.
I want to talk about. I just want to give an example of the terror in people.
Yeah,
my wife and I produce music and music videos and whatnot. We talked about that a little bit, and we did two music videos. We did a very tame one called Secrets. You can see it on YouTube. And it's about government corruption. It's not specific, and it's an original song and whatever. Anyway, on the night we released it, we normally release ourselves like our stuff at 12:30 in the morning, like early in the morning. But we upload it, the day before, 6 hours before 9 o'clock or something. And we uploaded that one. And if you can believe this, a bunch of the artists they weren't involved with the video, they're involved with the musical score, the people that played certain instruments. They phoned me in a panic. They wanted their names taken out of the credits.
No way.
So my question to you are we in a free country? Yeah. The people in my group were terrified. These artists, can you imagine an artist wants to take his name off of something? That never happens. And so, but then we produced another one called Overlord, and that one's over the top. And it really, so, but from that point on, we never put any of their names on any of the work anymore. There's our audio producer, he's on there still because he's just an incredible musical genius and a patriot. But that's the level of poisonous fear in a supposedly free country.
Well, I believe it is still free, but that we're operating under, unfortunately, a delusion that it's not, and that delusion is debilitating. But when I watch that video, apart from the music, or maybe because of the music, I see a number of things going on there. I see obviously the concept of truth, justice, hope, and something now that is anathema to our prime minister, and that is national pride. Yes. Our prime minister has come up with another one of his new words called over-nationalism. I think you have to be people kind to understand what that word is. But what I see here, and it's wonderful to see it, and it's the same brand of really positive, heartfelt, pure pride in Canada, in our values, in our culture, in our nation, that was so well expressed in the Freedom Convoy.
Yes.
And I see in that video, you're sort of, picking up the thread, and I see some of the motifs there, of course, with the trucker there, and Tamara Leach is in the video. And so is that the thrust of what you're becoming now, is kind of a grassroots movement to inspire people, to get them activated, and to sort of act as though we are free. You say, well, we're not a free country anymore, but it seems to me part of what you're trying to do is to get people to understand, give them information, make them question some of the things that have been going on in terms of the COVID narrative, and get active, get out there and get involved in the community. Do I have that right?
Well, absolutely. There's some subtlety in that video, and then there's the on top stuff, like the images and the music, and we're telling them what, trying to remind them, because there's been some talk in this country about, well, Ken, the mandates most of them are gone now, and we should just get back to life. And my response to that is, remember what happened. This is like someone's murdered somebody, and I guess they confessed to their minister or something, because they were going to get caught anywhere. And we could just go, oh, no, that's fine. We'll just get on with life, and you don't have to go to jail, or you don't have to face trial. Then there were some other things in there. You'll notice that when we show the, I think it's the trucker image, it says unafraid. That doesn't mean that you weren't afraid. And we wanted to acknowledge that. We were all afraid when we saw soldiers beating the RCMP horses, running down women with walkers, truckers being pulled out of their truck and beaten. We were all afraid, but we're unafraid now. And that's from a government standpoint, that's you better listen. Now the last part of this was, and really the reason we did this video obviously was to support and get word out on our report. But since we did the report, I've been out and about a lot. I've been to rallies, and I see speaker after speaker going up and telling people what's the matter. I see people, sometimes these things get extreme, and they're talking about the soil's gone and the water's gone and all this, and I watch their faces, and I can see they're bewildered. What are we going to do in the face of all this? And what's happened with this report, and you're absolutely right, it's become grassroots. And the reason it's become grassroots is because the ordinary Canadian can get up in the morning and take this thing and do something with it. They can
Right.
bring it to the police station. They can email it to this. And the very fact of them doing that, it's like filling a bucket with water. We're filling it one drop at a time. And believe me, one drop at a time, it's going to fill.
Mhm.
And so these people now have hope. And when I talk to them and I tell them there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that tunnel that they've been trudging along in and have seen no end to, they're being inspired. And that's why this thing has gone grassroots. That's why it's giving people hope that they can do something and they can
Mhm.
understand it. And we worded this in such a way that anyone can understand it. And when you're in court and you're writing a document, you better make sure it can be understood by,
Right.
and that's the way we
Right.
wrote this, and people understand. And when I hear people give me an introduction and they talk about well, he's got the statistics, and that turns people off like that. And
Yeah.
it's not statistics, it's numbers, and there's a little bit of division and a little bit of multiplication in there, and we show you how it's arrived at. You can check the numbers for yourself, and it's inspiring people because it's something they can do.
Yes. So what is the future then? What is the way forward? You mentioned that you're going around Manitoba. Are you traveling outside the province as well to spread the word and to spread the sort of the good news, as it were, to get people rallied around the idea of, look, if we want to be free, we want to live in a free country, the kind of country that, let's say, you and I thought we grew up in. We've got to do something. We've got to get out there. We have to act out these freedoms, or they're going to be gone, because the people who are ruling us don't want us to be free anymore. They've demonstrated that.
Yes. Well, as I said before, there's a group in BC, there's a group in Ontario, Quebec. I was contacted by someone, I think yesterday, in Alberta. They want to collaborate with me and write it for their own provinces, and groups are picking it up. There's been, I've spoken on I don't know how many shows so far in the last 2 weeks, and I'm booked up most of the week next week and the week after. So a lot of groups seem to be energized by this. Action for Canada has a whole page, or actually 2 full pages on it. And there's a video I did for them just a few days ago. It's on their website. It's on Rumble, where I actually go through the report and explain it all. So we haven't had to go out of the province with it yet, like physically, because it's just going. I mean, you know what? The other day I got a heartfelt email, and I'm getting hundreds, if not thousands, of these things. I got a heartfelt email from a lady, and I think she's in Victoria, 75 years old. She refused to get the shot. Her kids aren't talking to her anymore. She's been ostracized in her family, and she wants to do something. And she said to me, I don't know how all of these PDF electronic things. I said, don't worry. We printed off a bunch. We sent them to her. And she went into her local Staples. And this is hilarious. She went into her local Staples, and she was worried about it because she tried to get stuff printed there before. And when the girl who was doing the photocopying, she kind of read it, right? And then she made a big to-do, and they wouldn't print it for her. This thing. So she had that in her mind. And so she brought it in. It's a big document. I don't know how many copies she made. And she came back an hour or two later, and the girl who had been photocopying said to her, I read this thing. I can't believe what they did to us. And so she's out distributing it manually, going to the police stations. And I hear that story thousands of times from coast to coast, from Victoria to St. John's, and it's that hunger of the people to want to do something and be part of something, and to sleep at night that they've done what they can do.
Mhm.
So it's taken on a life of its own to some degree. I mean, we're pushing it along, and it's open source as far as we're concerned. Folks can use it, and they can send it, and they can do whatever they need to do with it. So we'll see.
If you were going to, I don't want to distill it too much, but if you were going to give a brief, let's say, Cole's Notes version of the essence of the report, what would it be? What would be the message that you'd want people to get from reading the report?
You will not believe the totality of the lies and deception. You think you all know it, but you don't. Even the things that we almost took for granted are lies and deceptions. They deceived you when they were telling you the numbers. When they told you that grandma was going to die if she got it, We looked at the numbers of people 70 years of age and older, and your chance of dying of COVID was, if you were 70 years in age and older, were 1 in 324, and your chance of just dying were 1 in 32. You know, pregnant women, we know people, couples who were pregnant at the time, and the doctors were after her, you got to get the shot, and the couple were fighting over it. And when you look at that one, the chances of a woman in getting, we did an analysis, and you can see the analysis in the report, but the chance of a woman contracting and dying of COVID in the childbearing years, 1 in 250,000. The chances of you dying because you were pregnant, 1 in about 16,000. The chance of you getting murdered was, I can't remember how many times more, or suicide. And so the totality of the lies, the mismanagement, everywhere we looked, I said it was a matter of us, I had to stop, and I had to stop somewhere. So if you think you know what they did to you, you won't know until you read this. It's that important that you read it, and you will see that everything they told you was a lie.
It's fascinating to hear about this and the public reaction to it. It reminds me a little bit of a report that, another work, let's say it's a similar work was done by Preston Manning. He's written something called the COVID report, and I actually wrote a commentary on it recently. And what Mr. Manning has done, he's constructed a thought experiment in which people like, let's say, people like us, privately crowdfund a public inquiry into what happened during COVID, which would look into 16 very pointed questions, the answers to which are probably all covered in your report. And then in the thought experiment, what happens is the answers are provided. There's a report that's generated, which is, of course, is a stirring indictment of the federal government. And then there's election, and all these guys are drummed out of office. And when I see your report, and I see what Mr. Manning is doing, and in Alberta, for example, there's the Alberta Prosperity Project. I don't know if you've heard about that, but they're all grassroots populist movements. And I think what has happened, and my take on this, and I'd be interested to get your thought on it, is that, and coming back to my quotation from Voltaire, I think as Canadians, we've been asleep a little bit. We've lost grassroots connection with some of our institutions. Yes. I'm talking about education, the church, things like scouts, okay, school boards, okay. The good people used to be out there in the community making sure that those boards that those things were properly run, the right values were being expressed, and that we were passing on all the beautiful things about Canada. We all know what those are. They're certainly very vividly displayed in your video. But what happened was we lost that grassroots connection. We got focused on other things. Maybe we took them for granted. And that's when these other people, you can call them the elite, you can call them the leftists, you can call them, some people call them big L liberals, whoever they are, they came in while we were sleeping, while we weren't paying attention, and they took over all of these important institutions. And what I'm seeing right now, and this is what's encouraging, and you can probably gather I tend to be a cup half full kind of person. My faith gives me optimism. I see that these populism movements are very, very encouraging, and I think also very frightening to those in power. I think specifically about the, let's say, the unfriendly receptions that our Prime Minister has received over the past week or so in places where previously he was very popular. He can't even go to a fundraiser anymore. And this, I think movements or grassroots, I hesitate to call it a movement, but grassroots ideas, reports like yours, what Mr. Manning is doing, what others are doing, I think this is the way we're going to take back our country. Would you agree with that?
I would, and we've been asleep as an electorate, if you will, and our representatives have really caught on to that. I've talked to I don't know how many people in all kinds of different ridings, and they've been emailing their MPs. They've been sending the report to their MPs. They've been phoning their MPs, and not a single one has got a response, including myself. And one of the other things we're doing to support this is we actually have done, believe it or not, we've done some analysis on the last election, particularly in the riding that I have in Manitoba. And although our MP got it, and he got 2 or 3 times more votes than anybody else, and he's been there for 8 or 9 years. He got 25,000 votes. There were 76,000 or 72,000 votes available. The closest other person got 9,000 votes. And we wrote a little article on this, and we said to people, he thinks he's really comfortable in there and he doesn't have to return calls or anything else. I tell you what, there were 25,000 people that never voted. And there's a bunch of people like me who's really mad. And I don't know what the number is, but we don't have to get a lot of people together. If we got 1,000 people together, I don't know, 5,000 people together as a group, and we demanded that guy comes down and personally sits with us 4 times a year, and we tell him what we think, and he better do what we think. I don't think we need 60,000 people. I think we need 5,000. I tell you a story. My brother, who was a fire chief in a small town some time ago, he said there were like, I don't know, 15, 20 people working in that fire station, and they got together as a voting block. And when they told the RM, the rural municipality, what they wanted, they got it. Because the elected officials were afraid of a voting block of 15, 20, 30 people when you add in their relatives. So if we can get 1,000 or 5,000 people together in each and every riding and make these people accountable, I think that's a step. Now, I also think we have to flush them all away by the ballot box. But I think we also, even if we flush them all away, we need to have representative groups that are going to hold their feet to the fire. Mm-hmm. And as long as we don't do that, as long as we're too busy watching Bachelorette on TV and all those other crazy things we're doing, it doesn't matter who we put in. They will become corrupted.
Right, and that's a big part of the problem, isn't it? It's and this is why your focus of your report is on truth. Where there's lies, there's corruption.
Yes.
And there's a sort of a rotting of our institutions that's happened. Now, I happen to think that they can be remedied, they can be ameliorated, but it's going to take some work, and we're all going to have to get in there and pitch in.
Yeah.
And in that vein,
well, before they leave that, there are some things that people may be not aware of, or some very fundamental things that need to be changed, like small things, root things. For instance, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, Parliament was functional and decisions were made by the representatives. Now most things are decided by cabinet. What about term limits? We have these people that are in there for 30 years. What about term limits? What do we do with the Senate? The Senate's completely irrelevant. It's something they throw their crony buddies into. Those are things that we could change fairly quickly and fairly easily, and they make a fundamental difference in our electoral process and make people more, I believe, more responsible. And you're not going in if you've got a term limit and you can only be elected 2 times or 3 times, whatever the number we decide. You're not going in there just to get a pension and to make money for the next 25, 30 years, because Trudeau can call an election in what's the shortest length of time? 40 days?
Yeah.
How the heck can you call an election and give it a 40-day time limit? That should be gone. It should be 6 months or 7 months or 8 months so that people can get organized and do things. So
right.
some very fundamental, maybe little things, maybe not exciting things, but those things need to be changed. Sorry.
I totally agree. In fact, that was the question I was going to ask you about, what key things do you think we need to change? A couple that I would throw onto that pile, firstly, is complete revocation of emergency powers.
Yes.
Governments do not need them. If our parliaments and our legislatures are working properly in the way that you've described, the way they always have, there's no need for them. We've seen what governments do with them, and it's not good. They are dangerous. They're not good for governments. They lead to abuse, and of course, they're very bad for the citizenry. The other big suggestion I have is we really need to impose spending limits on governments.
Yeah.
If you think about, if you go back to March 2020, if the Liberal government in Ottawa did not have access to a theoretically inexhaustible purse, they would have had to have been much more wise, much more ingenious, much more innovative about how they were going to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, whatever that problem was.
Yeah.
But as you saw, what they did is, to the Liberals, to this Liberal government, really every Liberal government I've ever seen, there's the same solution to every problem. That is, we throw money at it. And when that doesn't work, we throw more money at it. Mm-hmm. And really that has led to, we're experiencing right now the catastrophic calamity of that type of fiscal mismanagement, because we've got incredible inflation, interest rates rising. People can't even afford to fill up their cars and trucks and buy groceries, and of course they're coming at us with a whole series of new and wonderful taxes. If there were spending limits on what government could do, they would have to be more wise about the way that they govern us, as opposed to just using money as a tool to make it look like they're doing something, constructive. But of course, these are all populist ideas that are on the table. But I think it's really important that people like you are coming forward and at least getting people to think and talk about them again.
Yeah. I mean, you also have to get back to a meritocracy. And what I mean by that is the person who's best suited for the job should get that job, and they should do that job. Now, I know you're gonna correct me on this, but I watched some of the cross-examination of our friend there in Alberta that you were involved with. And I hate to say it, I was like the old guy watching a football game when he played football back in high school, ask this, ask that. And I knew what your strategy was, but some of the things that Ms. Henshaw said, I couldn't believe. How did you come up with doing these things in Alberta? Well, I followed Quebec and I followed BC, I think she said. I can't quite remember. And I sat there like, what? The people from Alberta paid you, I don't know, $400,000 a year, whatever the number is. And that's what you did? You played follow the leader?
Yes.
Where do you think they got their stuff from? Who did they follow? Mm-hmm. And what research did you do? But not to pick on her, but I could.
You can.
Even our courts. We have Supreme Courts that ruled that the carbon tax was constitutional because we're in this existential risk. And I don't want to get into that argument, but my question is, all right, what research did you do to come up with that answer, our Supreme Court, or did you watch CBC and David Suzuki? Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not saying what side of it I'm on, but I'd like to know what research they did to come to that conclusion. And so you have health officers who aren't health. You have, and I know I'm putting my neck out there talking about the judiciary, but judiciary who are making rulings on, I don't know, on CBC reports. I don't know. I haven't seen the ruling. I haven't seen the background. But it seems to me if you were going to rule on something like that, you'd have fundamental proof, scientific proof that you went through on different sides.
Right.
And we have police that won't act. We have police commissioners that are put in place because of political considerations. I mean, you always had that. But because of the way they look, would you believe that was going to be happening in 2022? You've got people being elected in oil country that are against oil.
Yeah.
You've got Canada has the third largest oil reserves in the world, and we're importing billions of dollars of oil from Saudi Arabia because we've got a rule against building pipelines east. What the is going on here? It's not just this. This is the latest manifestation of it on steroids. But these fundamental institutions that are non-functional. I mean, I couldn't believe when Ms. Henshaw, when you guys were cross-examining her, I think you talked to her, somebody said something to her about these other qualified doctors. Yes. And she said something like, I don't know what exactly she said. I can't remember. I was so mad. They're all idiots or something. Like, what?
Yes.
I'd like to see her resume. I tried to find her resume. I tried to find Teresa Tam's resume. I can't. I tell you what, you look online.
I
Yeah,
can send you Dr. Hinch's.
I would love to see it. But tell you what, if you look online for my resume, you could find it. And I'm not working for the guy for the people of Canada.
Yeah. But the whole undercurrent in all of those threads that you just described is truth, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
we've lost our regard, our fundamental regard for objective truth, right?
Yes.
It's all about my truth. There's different versions of the truth. There used to be only one truth, right? There was truth and there was fiction, and now we're faced with different versions of truth. But this is getting back to my comment earlier. My sense is that the populist movement is about a certain exhaustion with that, a certain exasperation that people are fed up, and this is manifested, for example, in the political demise of Mr. Kenney in our province.
Yes.
There was half of the province, people who supported him overwhelmingly said, you know what, we're done with you. And I would say when people ask me, and people have asked me, what happened with Mr. Kenney, and fundamentally he was not trustworthy.
Yeah.
He just was not forthright and honest. Yes, he paid a price for the COVID policies, as he should have, and he's not the only one who should. But fundamentally, people just could not believe him anymore because. And I think if we can begin to judge our rulers, to assess their effectiveness on the basis of their trustworthiness as a function of whether or not they tell the truth and they're honest and they have integrity, I think that's getting on the right track. And it seems to me that's really what your report is about. Saying, look, let's look at what these guys are doing and whether or not they're telling us the truth. And if they're not, let's do something else, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. And there's a section in the report that talks about something people probably never heard of. It's the Canadian influenza pandemic plan, which
I've seen that.
Yeah, Theresa Tam was the director on, and just about everybody who's somebody in medicine right now is in that report. There's 9 pages of people who contributed, and they described what happened in the pandemic in that report exactly the way it happened. So there was no surprises, but all of the recommendations they either didn't do or they did the opposite. They said, don't use masks. They said, don't shut down anything. They stockpiled $28 million, I think, or $30 million of antivirals that they didn't use. I mean, how is it possible that we spent, I don't know how much it cost to do that report, but with 9 pages of contributors and 551 pages of text, it must have been millions. And yet we didn't follow any of it. And yet they stood up and said, oh, we're doing everything the right way. Follow your damn plan. And they didn't.
Yeah.
And it's the same people who know they get away with it because no one is holding them accountable. I mean, still to this day, you can talk to people on the street and they're thinking they're all doing a great job and they saved us because there were going to be billions of people that died because the mainstream media is captured by the political process now. All of them.
Right.
It's
So we've kept you for quite a while here, Ken. We're very grateful for your time and your knowledge. So if people want to get their hands on this report, how would they do that? We're going to provide a link, but you want to tell us where they can get a hold of it? You must be, if people are emailing you, you must be very, very busy. Is there some place where they can go, like a link where they can find it?
Well, there is a link. The trouble is that the link is 2.5 paragraphs long for each document. There's actually 5 links. So what they can do is they can actually find it in a whole bunch of different places. It's on Freedom for Canada. It's on Police for Freedom. It's on I don't know how many different groups now. But I don't mind. Email us. It's the email address is thetruefactsc19@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Facebook. Just Ken Drysdale on Facebook. You'll see it. Now there's a mixture of, that Facebook site was made to promote music and it's now doing this. So you'll see a music post and you'll see a political post, but follow me on Facebook. But the thetruefactsc19@gmail.com. Don't worry about it. Email me. I will send it to you straight away.
Fantastic. Well, I'm an audiophile, so I'm sure I'm going to enjoy your Facebook page. You can expect to get a friend request from me, so you better not freeze me out. I know you're very adept at freezing. So So Ken, this is the part of the program where we try to sort of wrap things up and send people away with um, some idea of where they can go to further their education and understanding. Obviously, one way that people can do that is by actually reading the report. But our tradition here is to provide something from a reading list. I'm going to go first and then let you give you the honor of finishing us off. I see a lot of books in the background, so I expect you're a reader. This book, I don't often recommend very famous books, well-known books. The one that I've chosen today is very well known, but I find it's one that many people refer to without having actually read it. And it's George Orwell's 1984.
Very good choice.
Yes. And the reason why I chose it is because, of course, the novel is about the distortion of truth and how the distortion of truth and really ignoring objective truth and distorting it leads to perversion and corruption and destruction, not only of cherished institutions, but of freedom, of conscience, of religion, of humanity itself, really. And so it becomes it shows where the destruction of truth, when taken to the nth degree, really ends in nihilism and a dystopian universe. And of course, everybody's heard of the Ministry of Truth. Of course, in Canada, United States now, this has come into reality. Which should surprise no one, because if you've been paying attention over the past couple of years, we shouldn't be surprised at anything that these governments come up with. But it's a great book from the point of view of it's a chilling, prophecy of the future. No, it doesn't have to be this future. It isn't a book that people are going to find much hope in, but it certainly is a cautionary tale. And no one can deny the influence of this novel, which is actually, it's less of a novel than it is a political treatise, I find. But its hold on the imaginations of multiple generations of readers really is something that testifies to its relevance. And so I would encourage people to actually read it. If you don't want to read it, you can listen to it for free on YouTube, but try not to take at face value what people, especially people on CBC and CNN, say about what the book actually says. So with that, Ken, do you have any suggestions about things that people can read or websites they can access that can further their understanding of truth and the topics we've been discussing today?
Absolutely. There's a book called Bonhoeffer, and our old friend Eric McTaxis wrote that book. Eric
is this about Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
Yes.
Oh, I'm a big fan. Yes.
Yeah, you probably want to read this real quick after you read 1984, because when you're finished 1984, you're gonna get really depressed. But the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer is very inspirational. It also talks about what an individual can do and what they can accomplish, and the courage that he displayed in an incredibly difficult situation. He was a pastor in Nazi Germany, and he ended up losing his life, but he stood up for what he believed in, regardless of what was going on around him. So I would highly recommend that, and I'm going to get a lot of moans on this one. I would also highly recommend that you read your Bibles.
Oh, yes.
And to quote Mr. Peterson, he said, even if you don't believe in the Bible, even if you don't believe in a God, live your life as if there is a God. And that'll go along. I wish I would have said that, but I'm not going to take away Jordan Peterson's credit. I think it's an excellent way to look at life. And I think if you do read your Bibles and you listen to what it's telling you, even if you don't believe in God, live your life as if there is a God, and it will make a much better world.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Collection of 66 books, at least in the Bible that I have, the King James one that I read. For people who find the Bible daunting and like to really get into Bible study, I'll just sort of lop a scoop of ice cream onto yours. Dennis Prager, who you're probably familiar with,
Yeah.
has he's a scholar, especially of the Old Testament, and he's produced a number of wonderful books called the Rational Bible, where he breaks down, for example, things like the Ten Commandments and puts them into very commonsensical, practical situations so that they're easily understood. And I think the way his interpretations of Genesis and Deuteronomy, for example, are just brilliant, and I really enjoyed those. So I just sort of piggyback that onto your suggestion. So thanks very much.
Well, just to have the last word.
Okay.
Hillside College also has some incredible free tutorials or courses, if you will, online, and you log into them and you can listen to them. They're incredible lecturers, and I'm thinking of one because you mentioned Genesis. They've done one on Genesis, and it's fantastic. It's made for ordinary people, not scholars, to understand the underlying fundamental principles.
Right.
So, Hillside College, great resource.
Thank you. And you shall have the last word. You deserve it. Ken, we're so grateful to have met you and gotten to know you a little bit. God bless the work that you've done. Thank you for producing this report and really for giving information and truth and hope to so many Canadians who are enjoying the fruits of your work. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time today. We're very grateful.
Well, I appreciate you having me on and being kind enough to listen to my ramblings. And hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Thank you. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Okay.